Thank you. As a note, I've only given a few in-person talks lately just because of COVID. And I take my mask off actually for accessibility reasons. Some people read lips. It's a little more accessible for speakers to take their masks off. Thank you to everyone who is masked in the audience. It's always never too late to mask if you're considering masking. Okay, so I'm Frank Ilabsky. I'm a PhD student. I'm a researcher at Carnegie Mellon. I research, engineer, design, and I contribute to standards at the intersection of accessibility and visualization. So this topic is my jam. This is what I talk about all the time and where I work. So today, I hope to go over important concepts, history, and practice for what accessibility and visualization means, as well as some focus on mapping in the process specifically. Before we start, I want to remind you all, please add alt text if you post anything to social media. It would be so ironic if you did not. Every now and then it happens though. I will be gracious to you if you forget alt text, but if I see it, I will remind you. So I just want to open with this video. Hopefully the audio works. We'll see. This is by Sarah Fossheim. It shows an online map by The Guardian, I believe, of the US 2020 presidential elections. And it's a screen reader experience of this online interactive map. A screen reader navigates content on a screen, and it announces information with audio about the content to its user. This is an assistive technology, and it's most commonly used by folks who are blind or low vision, although a whole slew of folks use screen readers who are not blind or low vision. So,
image, 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 one face, image.
I'll pause there. I think you probably get it. Goes on for all 50 states. Image is the only thing being announced. It's very interesting. So there's a focus indicator shown on Nebraska right now. That's a white outline that shows the location visually of the navigation. So there's oddly a little bit of navigation that has been built for this, but no textual description, no alt text, no labels, nothing's being read out to that screen reader. And a screen reader user would want to at least know the state that they've navigated to and who won that state, because that's what we're showing with this map visually. And this experience is actually slightly better than most. Most are much worse than this and really offer nothing. Sometimes a keyboard trap. Screen reader users get stuck in visualizations often. So by and large, though, data visualizations and maps are, especially interactive ones, are woefully inaccessible. So when I use this word accessibility, what really am I referring to? There's two broad definitions, I think. The first one is the broadest, and it's just accessibility is the qualities that make an experience open or usable to all. We might use this if we say we're teaching data science to high schoolers, making the material more accessible, or if we say something like broadband internet access. Those are both under this definition. But the second definition is the most common, and it's more specific. And it's the qualities that make an experience open or usable specifically for people with disabilities. It's an important shift in focus, and it's obviously what we'll be talking about today. So why? Why do we do accessibility work? Okay, this is a definition, showing a little bit what it's like. I legitimately want everyone in this room to consider this question. It's an important question to know the answer to. There is an answer. There's lots of answers, but there's one answer that I hope you all carry with you of why accessibility work should be done. It's a human right, of course. It's the right thing to do. It's the best answer to this question. People have a business pitch for accessibility. There's a lot of other ways you can frame it and its value, but this fundamentally is the most important definition, and it's also the simplest. It's the easiest answer. Somebody says, why do you do this? Or why would we prioritize this? It's the right thing to do. So who is disabled now? We've gone a little over what, why, who now. Who are people with disabilities? According to the CDC's research, they do this study every few years and then post about it. Put a report out, paper about it. Everything's a post in my brain. 27% of people living in the United States self-report living with a disability that affects their daily life. That's more than a quarter of all people. So I'm going to break these down. And of course, they don't add up to a neat 27%, and that's because a lot of disability is intersectional, right? So 4.1% have color vision deficiency, 4.5% blindness or low vision, 10.8% cognitive and neurological. That includes things like ADHD, autism. 13.7% have a motor, dexterity, or mobility-related disability. That's the most common category, largely due to aging. And vestibular and motion and balance-related is 7.4%. So every single one of these categories of disability affects every aspect of data visualization work, including mapping, from our visual design, our non-visual design, the stories we tell, the statistics we're discussing and describing, interaction design, device considerations, performance, animations, transitions, all of it. So what's the state of accessibility? I love this silly little diagram. I use it all the time. It's very silly though, but it helps frame a lot of my talks. Okay, so creators use tools to make things, and as time goes on, we get more and more things. That's because, the line's going up. Does anyone in the room actually want to guess, just shoot from the hip if you don't know, what percentage of stuff that is already made is inaccessible in some way, has some kind of barrier, measurable barrier for people?
99. 95.
Oh, I love how involved you are. Wow, I usually have to really get the audience involved. Okay, love your guesses. It's like basically all of it actually. It's 97 to 99%. We have a great study, looks at the top 1 million web pages every year, like home pages. You'd think home pages are probably the best or most representative thing a company would put out there. It probably should be the most accessible, and it's still, almost all of them have at least one major accessibility barrier. And in research on social media is much worse. Depending on the measurement, it's between 98 and 99.99% inaccessible. So the thing that scares me is that this rate has largely stayed the same over the years, but we put more stuff out there. That's bad. That is a hostile landscape for people with disabilities to navigate. So we're going to go over some concepts now. Hopefully you're all not too depressed, but a little depressed. Our first major concept or concepts, this is a curb, and we've all encountered them. A curb is a raised difference between a sidewalk and a street. The curb isn't the concept, though. We're going to use the curb to talk about the medical and social models of disability. So, curbs and wheelchairs don't mix. This is a real historical problem. Historically, for the last couple hundred years, the medical model of disability has been the dominant paradigm to approaching problems like the curb-wheelchair dilemma. The medical model believes that the body is the cause or location of disability. It's where disability is on a body. And this is according to normative standards. So, generally speaking, this is how medicine operated for a long time. There are changes in medicine today, by the way, with the medical model. But still philosophically, many people frame disability solely with the medical model. And in some ways, we can thank the medical model. So the wheelchair is a result of the medical model. Medicine is the result of the medical model. It does some things well. But in the curb-wheelchair dilemma, the medical model would seek to augment or cure the body. A lot of medical and technological projects, literally to this day, still look to augment or cure an individual's disability in order to overcome something like a curb. And this puts the burden on the individual to access and afford these fancy new inventions, and they're often super impractical. Like most stair climbing prototype wheelchairs are like literally over 1,000 pounds. Some of them are 2,000 pounds and like $15,000 to make. And nobody can afford that. But there's another way actually to frame disability. And that is that the curb, which is an artificial thing that we made, is a barrier. And that these artificial barriers are where disability is located or where it is produced. Disability then in the social model is produced by human-made things, whether those are laws or norms or physical or technological structures. I did say it's a concept. We're getting a little conceptual. Okay, so in the social model, we take action on the environment, on the constructed things. And in the social model, we would cut the curb. And why do we call it the social model? Because in the medical model, medicine solves disability. But in the social model, we, society, the creators of the world around us and these barriers, we're the ones responsible for getting rid of those barriers we make. So historically speaking, it actually took a lot of advocacy and action to get curbs cut and standardized. And largely, people did benefit from cutting curbs, even folks who don't use wheelchairs. People are much safer crossing the streets Cut curbs are very good. This actually is a well-studied phenomenon, and it's called the curb cut effect. So that leads us to our next concept, which builds off of the curb cut effect. It's about situational impairment or situational limitations. And this is when lights usually start turning on in people's brains. My own advisor at CMU said that when he learned this, it's like accessibility really clicked. So some folks have a permanent condition in a medicalizing framing. We'd say they have a permanent disability. Someone might be born quadriplegic or they lost a limb due to an accident. They permanently do not have use of a limb. But other folks, like someone playing a sport, fell, broke their arm, and that's temporary. We might call it a temporary disability or impairment. And then lastly, we have situational ones. Somebody might just literally be carrying something with one arm. So temporarily, based on that situation, they can only use one of them, such as holding a baby. So accessibility work that's designed with folks that have permanent conditions, permanent disability, often has a downstream benefit for other folks who experience temporary or situational impairment. This is an extension of that idea behind the curb cut effect. Everyone in this room has experienced situational and temporary impairments in life, probably even today, already. And as we age, disability comes for all of us. So this important framing, this second concept, is about how disability is part of all of our lives, and accessibility is as well. It's an important framing to personalize this. Like, we should care about it because it's human rights, but also it affects us. We have a personal stake in this. So the phrase "design for one, extend to all" is used by Microsoft to capture this idea. A lot of folks, this is when they start to realize accessibility, is all around us, it's everywhere. It's made the worlds we inhabit, both physically and digitally, better. We often take for granted what accessibility has already done for this. So I often use my phone as an example of this. This is a pretty good example, I think, right now. So about 2.5 years ago, I got a hardware update, and it broke my phone for some reason. So the contrast, which is the brightness, no longer automatically adjusts. I have to go in and slide it to brighten the screen, and it's really busted in the mid-ranges, so it's like really bright or really dark. Works. But on a bright day, if I go outside and it's on the low contrast setting, I literally cannot see my screen to turn it on. Never before have I considered the situational impairment of the sun, because we take for granted something like an automatically adjusting contrast setting on our phones. So technology like this is everywhere. But does this design for one, extend to all have limits or problems? This is really important to mention. It does. It isn't the start or the end of accessibility work. So the last most important concept we're going to talk about is disability-centered design. It frames some of our oldest and newest projects. Back in '77, there was a famous protest started in San Francisco, 504 sit-in, centered around the idea that disability rights needed to be enshrined in law, and that anything about people with disabilities must include people with disabilities. The phrase, "nothing about us without us," is sacred in disability circles. It's still obviously absolutely vital today. And disability-centered work is that simple. Whenever we build, design, standardize, legislate, research, or engineer for people with disabilities, we must do it with them as well. Watch that framing of for and with. It's very important to pay attention to those words. Over time, especially in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, work that was assumed to have more of a curb cut effect was prioritized. It just sounds better to the business folks, I guess, who do things that help non-disabled people. Design for one, extend to all is a really good business proposition. You can use it in business settings for that reason. Sometimes anything works to win over the business people. But 27% of the population is no small number. Luckily, the prioritization of curb cut work has been changing recently. We've been returning to disability-centered work in the form of co-design, participatory design, so I'm hopeful about things. And some of our stuff, really our best stuff, may never fully extend to other people. Here's 8 beautiful historical tactile maps that the Perkins School for the Blind has archived. Some of these date back to the early 1800s. Our oldest tactile graphics were made with and for blind people. And Braille embossed maps, which are these bottom 2 on the right here, they have Braille and they use Braille dots, that's the embossing. These require someone to know how to read Braille. And this means that these maps aren't really helpful for someone with a temporary or situational vision impairment unless you know Braille. These are for experts. This design does not extend, but it's invaluable. So I've done co-design work myself. And I can't stress enough how impactful something like a Braille tactile map is compared to something like a text description with a screen reader. And it just helps spatial relationships click in ways that audio can't do justice. And I'd argue that our modern technological tools have made us a bit tool dependent. We get whatever accessibility they give us, usually. And we used to have maps like this. We still do, but it's much rarer for the mapping folks to do this kind of work. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I kind of also hope to inspire all of you. Maybe try something new. Look beyond your tools, and actually, really, tangibly, almost every major city, at least in the US, has a blind library. And mapping's very important. You want to volunteer your time somewhere? Go down there and say, hey, I would love to use my skills and love of mapping to help you out. I'm serious. I'm 100% serious. They will love that. Getting maps is a need that every city has. And locally, if you want to go check it out, the Library of Accessible Media for Pennsylvanians here in Pittsburgh. They're closed on Saturday, so you'd have to go today if you want to go. You can check it out. They're called LAMP. Mark Lee, tell him I said hi. I love Mark. Mark is very funny. He loves to do tours, especially on the fly, so maybe you'll get lucky. Okay, next section of the talk is practical. And it's a little bit of how-to. So in most of my practical workshops that I give, the most important thing I hope folks can walk away with is an improved ability to detect barriers. I want you to learn how to see the curbs all around you, especially in your own work. So I came up with a project called Chartability. It helps folks evaluate the accessibility of their data visualizations. I've used it a lot in industry collaborations too. I've done like 120,000 tests, actually more than that to date. And a lot of it applies to mapping. So in this online interactive map, the US 2020 presidential elections by CNN, I show in one of my workshops that you can find almost 1,000 accessibility barriers just in this one map. And I do it in about an hour. Of course, we're not going to spend an hour going through everything you need to know to do this, so we're going to breeze really fast at a high level through things. And really, you get better the more you do this. So if it seems super intimidating, it's totally fine. It's realistic. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. Okay. So accessibility works organized into principles, accessibility standards bodies like the Web Accessibility Initiatives, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. They're like the big one. They have 4 principles, and we're just going to go over 3. So the first one is perceivable. And this principle should help you think of the simple questions. Can someone perceive this thing I'm evaluating in multiple ways? And is each way easy? So, first, most common, is designing with high contrast. On the left, a bunch of text and bars have really low contrast. It's hard to see, and low contrast is super common in mapping. On the right is high contrast. There's a minimum level that's important because it helps folks visually distinguish between one thing and the other. It's often a foreground thing and a background thing. There's tests for this, so just Google accessibility contrast checker and you can dig in. So another thing is whether color alone is used to communicate meaning. In maps, this is important for highways, roads, trails, all use a different thickness or pattern so you can distinguish them from one another. And color vision deficiency, or CVD, color blindness, is often the motivation for avoiding color-only approaches. There's plenty of cool techniques in this space too. Color is actually where I got started in accessibility, so it's a fun space. So for all of you practically, Esri actually has a great map. It's an enhanced contrast map, so like check this out and study it. See their techniques, apply some of their techniques in your own work. It's a great map. Okay, so perception obviously isn't just visual. We perceive with other senses, so adding alt text is the single most important thing you can do to make visual content accessible to blind, deaf, blind, and low vision folks. And there are a lot of good guides out there for describing charts, graphs, and maps. The most important thing you all need to know is that you should just do it. And you shouldn't be afraid of trying your best. Just get started. Crafting text experiences in general is just writing, and it's an artful skill. It's hard to get good at. Don't be intimidated early on. Just try and be concise, descriptive, and practical. And just start there. So, next principle is operable. Similar questions. Can someone operate it in multiple ways? And is each way easy? And there's basically a dominant paradigm. So mouse and touch, which we call direct pointers, rule everything, really, still today in computing. And many assistive technologies actually navigate content. They don't use a direct pointer. And these have been around since the early days of computing. So shown here is a person in a wheelchair in 1960 operating a computer with a sip and puff device. That's that tube that comes off the desk. And they control the computer with breathing patterns. And that navigates. And sip and puffs are still used today and poorly supported in basically every data visualization and interactive map. So an easy heuristic for all of you, this is super easy, and you'll realize how bad everything is. Anything you can do with a mouse, if it does anything functional or informational and has a purpose, you should be able to do whatever that purpose is with just your keyboard. I guarantee you'll be like, nothing works. Yeah, nothing works. WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, calls this a single A standard. It's literally an absolute bare minimum. Everything interactive should have this. Keyboards are foundational to most technology that navigates, including screen readers. So normally at this point in a focus workshop, we'd actually use screen readers for the first time, but we don't have time today, so please try it out. Just Google and get started. I mean, it's a very big ask, but screen readers are fun when you get used to them. They're just super intimidating up front. Okay, final principle we're talking about is understandable. Same type of questions. Can someone understand this in multiple ways, and is each way easy? We'll just focus on the easy one, because there's obviously a lot to each principle we're not going over. So the best way to check if your stuff is understandable in an easy enough way is reading level. Clear, simple writing is literally better for everyone. I often say that as far as curb cut effects go, cognitively accessible text is the biggest curb cut. It's just super impactful for everyone. I don't think we all realize we have the curse of knowledge. When we write, we tend to be very technical, and that really excludes a lot of people. So there's a great tool for testing your reading comprehension level of your writing. This is the Hemingway editor. There's quite a few out there that use, some use machine learning, but and you want your reading grade level in US school grades to be grade 9 or lower, and it'll let you know. So this one on the left is really red because it's a post-grad level, and then same type of information is communicated just in a much easier way at a grade 6. So that's just a sample of 3 principles. There's 4 in total in web standards, 7 in chartability, and in chartability there's actually 50 total heuristics. I think we went over 4 or 5. There's a lot more, so highly recommend check it out. And of course, most of it applies to mapping as well. My last project, Data Navigator, I'm literally just gonna plug. It's a tool, it adds an accessible substrate to any visual, so like an image, chart, or map. And this interactive layer enables interactivity with a lot of assistive technologies and input modalities. So it's cool. I just wanna plug it because I actually really want mapping people to get involved. And start making their maps navigable and interactive with assistive technology. I hope this helps. So yeah, reach out if you want to collaborate or whatever. Thanks. If you want these slides, tons of good resources also just on my website, frank.computer. Thanks.